On the flight deck, listeners are manning up for the podcast launch. It's time for all unnecessary shows to clear the airwaves.
You're listening to the Hangar Bay, a podcast dedicated to the latest military flight simulation and hardware news. From developers to the community and everything in between, the Hangar Bay will get you squared away.
Welcome down to the Hangar Bay, your source for the latest news that every military flight simulation pilot can use. Today is Sunday, June 30th, 2024. I'm your host, Sumanji, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Hangar Bay. I hope each and every one of you have had a wonderful week in the virtual skies. And if you're like me, it's been kind of a letdown after last week and all the wonderful news we had coming out of Flight Sim Expo last weekend. Now it's just kind of transitioned back into a normal, calm week, I suppose. But with that said, we still do have a lot of exciting news to cover this week, and we'll be sure to get into all of it on today's show. But before we get started, just a brief reminder that you can always follow along with this week's show notes, including pictures and videos on thehangarbaypod.com, or you can watch the video version of this show on YouTube or on Spotify. And with that out of the way, let's get things started like we do each and every week with the Flyby. The Flyby is where we aim to cover the highlights from this week's news in 60 seconds or less. Kicking things off this week, the military flight sim community will return to the skies over Korea thanks to the IL-2 Great Battles developers, who officially announced Korea IL-2 series as their next title. On the modern side of the house, we got Eagle Dynamics providing an update regarding ongoing development efforts to improve ground unit target detection in their weekly newsletter. Shifting things over to the hardware side, Moza Racing officially opened pre-orders for their new product lineup this week, including the force feedback base that I know everyone's interested in, which went on sale for a price tag of $550 US. And then finally on the hardware side, Virpil made a series of post-Flight Sim Expo statements providing more details on the new products they plan to release later this year, including new joystick grips, bases, a throttle, a button box, as well as a set of rudder pedals. All right, that was just a few of the bigger stories for this week, so stick around for the full show where we'll cover each of these stories in more detail, as well as the rest of this week's news. On that note, let's get things started like we do with the developers.
Hey everyone, Wags here.
Developer News is where we bring you the latest happenings from game developers and related third parties. And starting things off, we've got the Korea IL-2 series, probably the biggest news of the week, in my opinion. But if you've been listening to this show for a while, you can cast your mind back to episode 1, where we kind of discussed the well-known rumor that was the next chapter in the IL-2 universe. And at the time, the developers were strongly indicating that it would be the Korean conflict. However, this was the first official confirmation we received from the development team this week, and that came in the form of a YouTube video as well as the very first development diary. So lots to chew on in this initial release. So what exactly will we be getting in this new title? Well, the timeline will actually be a little bit more focused version of the Korean conflict. So they're actually aiming with this initial release to focus on the time period from April 1951 to July 1953. So they're going to be kind of focusing on the period of the conflict which stabilized around operations in the northern part of the peninsula. So we won't have that initial breakout all the way to the south and then like the Incheon landing up north again. Kind of this will be like once the battle lines have kind of concentrated back up north. So we'll be looking at that area of the country. And I have a good screenshot of what it looks like the map will be a little bit later on here. At the time of release, they also went on to say that no less than 8 player-controlled aircraft, half of them which will be jets and the other half will be piston engine aircraft, will be available to players. So no less than 8. The confirmed aircraft list that a user over on the IL-2 forums, Mad Kerbal, posted was the Yak-9P, the IL-10, the MiG-15, the F-51, the F-4 Corsair, the F-80, and the F-86. So we've also seen some screenshots that look beautiful of the B-29, but as of right now, that's confirmed to be an AI aircraft. And, there could be some additions to this list later on, and I fully expect we'll see a business model similar to what we saw with in the IL-2 Great Battles series, where there'll be additions to the map or new aircraft and follow-on releases. But again, this is the starting point for what we can expect from the initial release. They went on to add that they are planning to recreate the air forces of the U.S., North Korea, USSR, and China. So if you're looking for any additional countries that participated in this conflict, again, that's potentially one to keep an eye out for later additions to the game. However, the biggest thing, and we talked about this back in January, is the difference in the main game mode. So they're going to be expanding the role of the player. So you're no longer just a single pilot focused on the individual success of your mission. You will now be more of a unit commander. So you'll be responsible for managing personnel, planning combat missions, as well as managing unit resources such as manpower and aircraft. So looks like there's going to be a lot more depth to the single player portion. No indications currently how much of that will extend to the multiplayer scene. And then finally, what else is new? Well, the biggest news probably from the graphical standpoint is that this is an entirely new game engine. So they built this from the ground up for this new title. This is not a continuation of the old IL-2 engine. As a result, they are touting things such as a new visual system for vegetation, effects, damage modeling, a new decision-making by the AI, a new radio communication system, as well as a whole lot more. Now, in some of the screenshots, I certainly do think it looks much prettier than some of what we've seen recently in the IL-2 titles, but I wouldn't call this like a revolutionary upgrade. So it feels more of a slight upgrade and a continuation of what they were working on, even though it is being touted as a new engine. So nothing I'm necessarily complaining about, but if you were frustrated by the IL-2 engine, I don't know if you're necessarily going to be seeing a lot of huge differences here. However, hopefully in one way we'll really see some benefits is allowing more aircraft on screen, right? So we can have larger bomber formations, larger fighter formations, things of that nature. They did talk about what's next in the development process. They said they're actively developing the GUI, the graphical interface right now, as well as fleshing out some of the game modes, creating additional cockpit models. But they did indicate the map itself is in roughly its final shape, and they're now kind of fine-tuning things by populating cities and airfields. And they're going to discuss all of this, as well as continued efforts in future dev diaries. So stay tuned. But it sounds like it's in a solid enough state that they wanted to release it and talk about it, officially confirm it. So that just means we're hopefully that much closer to getting our hands on it. So I would assume this will probably be closer to a 2025 release, if anything, maybe even 2026, but they did not mention any dates. So that's just me thinking about what the full timeline might be in terms of a potential early release. And there are some screenshots. I hinted at that before, and those are included here in the show notes. And then finally, as I mentioned, the map as well. So this is thanks to Fried Raptor over on the Hoggett subreddit. He posted a nice little comparison based on the developers saying the map will be 440 by 440 kilometers. And then he kind of compared that to what it looks like in BMS. So Falcon BMS's map versus IL-2's map, and you can kind of see where we might land on things. So anyway, looks very, very promising. Excited to see what's in store for us from the team. Definitely one to keep an eye on. Always exciting to have a new title confirmed in the military flight sim space. That said, shifting things over and staying in the IL-2 broader universe, we did get an update from Team Fusion, developers of IL-2 Cliffs of Dover. They just provided a brief update on the development progress of their FW190A that will be coming in the next update for the series. Again, this is hopefully aiming for a fall or winter 2024 release. This will be the addition of some new aircraft as well as the new map focusing on the channel area. So they said that the external damage model is complete. They're not showing cockpit images in this update, but it's well underway. And then they just showcase kind of what the skin looks like, as well as some of the damage modeling. So if that's something of interest to you, you've been following the IL-2 Cliffs of Dover scene, check out that little update. I got some screenshots, and then you can also check it out on their forum as well. All right, then shifting things over to the modern side of the house, we did get an update from Eagle Dynamics with their weekly newsletter. Probably the biggest thing I want to know up top for you, if you were looking to pick up some new modules, the Steam Summer Sale is on, which means that you can also pick up modules or campaigns or maps from DCS on Steam as well. So if you're one who prefers to purchase things on Steam, be sure to check that out. The Steam sale goes until July 11th at 1700 GMT, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the US. And then obviously we mentioned the e-sale or the eShop official store sale last week. That goes until July 14th. So plenty of time to pick up some new stuff if you're interested. Also, this is a public service announcement. It's not in the show notes, but I did want to remind you, if you are thinking about pre-ordering Afghanistan or the CH-47, those products are still tentatively planning to release, I believe, this Wednesday, if that's right, Wednesday, July 3rd. So that is the time window where that the 30% off savings will shift to 20% off savings once it fully enters early access. So not a huge price savings, but if you did want to pick it up, this is just your friendly reminder. Get that discount now before it goes live. Okay, back to the newsletter. I mentioned this in the upfront notes, and coming back to it now in more detail. One of the main parts of the newsletter this week was improving the AI ground unit's behavior. And essentially what they're trying to focus on here is they're reworking the target detection of ground units. So if you've flown helicopters or even any aircraft really in DCS, right, you get in range of a ground unit, it doesn't really matter what it's doing. That T-90 swings the main battle turret around at you and boom, just starts taking pot shots at you. And you're like, what the hell? So with surprising accuracy as well. Essentially what they're trying to do is develop a model or an AI framework where it's a little bit smarter about how it goes about detecting you. So currently, they provide an example here, and they say, currently the AI will detect the target as soon as it enters the kill zone, and the target is immediately designated for attack if the target's within range, per my own experience, and I'm sure yours as well. The new version essentially is going to modify this and try to introduce a little bit more realistic logic. So the range and time after which the target is detected will depend on the crew's level of training. So if the unit's in a green or red state as well, like, right, are they alert or are they relaxed? And the sights with which the unit is equipped. So kind of multiple things it's going to depend on. How well trained are they? Like, are they rookie versus veteran? What's their current status? And then finally, what equipment do they have to detect things? So they go on to provide an example of how this could fluctuate, and they use the example of a BMP, and they say that an average crew will detect an aircraft at a distance of about 2 to 3 kilometers, whereas an excellent crew might detect it at 4 to 5 kilometers. And they're trying to introduce that floating probability of detection, so it's always not so stark and a line in the sand, and there will be some dynamic capabilities of that. So, and then they also go on to state that if a crew's in a red state, right, it's actively engaged, it might have its hatches closed, so observation would only be possible through the commander and gunner sights, so it would even be more challenging for the crew to see the enemy. So they might not even see you until you're right on top of them. So they go on to provide a few more examples, and it's worthwhile checking out in the newsletter. I imagine if you fly DCS, this is a change a lot of us will be interested in, especially with the recent release of so many helicopters and a refocus on ground unit logic in general. So this is really good to see, and I appreciate the open nature of the discussion and examples, right? Providing us with some better understanding of what they're actually aiming for with this update. They do go on to say the upcoming change should address the issue of non-air defense ground units being too capable of engaging aircraft. However, they do say this is just the first step, and they'll continue to refine this as it's introduced, and we have experience and feedback, and they will also continue to work on adding things such as line of sight, meteorological conditions, and then additional target parameters. So, and they also end by saying we'll aim to provide more firing methods such as barrage fire versus directed fires, thing of that nature. So something to keep an eye on, definitely progress. No timeline on when this will be introduced to the game, unfortunately. I don't think from the way this was presented that this will go live on July 3rd, but hey, you never know. That would be fantastic. So hopefully it will be sooner rather than later. And then finally, one tidbit from the newsletter is we have a campaign from a new third party for DCS. So this will be a campaign for the Huey called Worlds Apart Stormfront. So the Stormfront campaign is in development by a new studio, or at least one I was not familiar with, Low Level Heaven, the mission development team over there. This is a campaign set in spring of 2025. You'll be flying as a German Huey pilot for the German Army Wolfpack Squadron. It's going to be 12 missions, and one of the things that stood out to me was 3 of which have a split element. So you could either go down path A or path B. That's kind of how I thought of it. And then it says by doing that, you're going to add some totals to that and bring the total number of outcomes up higher than 12. So there's a little bit of element of replayability in there. So not a ton of developer news, but I expect this time next week, we're going to have a huge amount of developers news covering primarily the biggest news, which will be the large DCS patch currently planned for Wednesday. So hopefully you got some time off of the 4th of July in between spending time with your family. You'll be able to enjoy that one, something to look forward to for next week. Okay, let's shift things over to the hardware side of the house now.
Flight controls. Flight controls.
If you can move it, toggle it, push it, or rotate it, hardware news is where we're going to talk about it. And kicking things off this week, we got Moza Racing opening up pre-orders for flight products. So if you cast your mind back to last week, we discussed Moza Racing, primarily known for their sim racing gear, have now entered the flight sim market, and they're doing so with the release of 3 new products. The Moza Racing AB9 force feedback base, which I imagine will be the most popular, And then they have the MH16 Moza Racing grip. This looks very, very similar to the Winwing F16EX grip, if you're familiar with that. And then finally, they introduced a Z-axis module, so it will help you if you are someone who likes to have that Z-axis or that rudder rotation, the ability to rotate your grip left and right on the stick, and it provides a little bit of an extension for it as well. So I mentioned up front that the biggest news was probably pricing. We came out of Flight Sim Expo, we heard all this noise about force feedback gear, but the thought was, all right, well, how much is it actually going to cost? So the big news came out cheaper than I expected, $550 US for that base. Now that does not include shipping. We'll get to that in a moment, but it is still a little bit more of a competitive price point than I was initially expecting. We also did receive confirmation about compatibility. As of right now, the team over at Moza has said they will support the Thrustmaster A10 and F16 and F18 grips, as well as the Virpil CM2 grip. So we're currently waiting on updates for compatibility with any other grips. I did want to highlight Jabbers. He did receive this base for review testing and will likely provide updates soon. So if you haven't followed him or are not aware who that is, that's at IMJabbers. Jabbers. You can follow him on Twitter. He's also on YouTube. He's done an extensive amount of DCS and flight sim related content in the past. He's got this for testing, and he'll be testing it with a variety of grips and extensions this week. So as soon as I get an update from him or any other content creators, I'll be sure to provide it on the show of folks who've got their hands on this throttle and can actually see what it integrates with. It does sound like it will not be compatible, though, at least initially, or without some other third-party modification for Winwing grips. Stay tuned on that one. Again, this is a situation where I definitely recommend waiting for reviews on this one if this is a product that you're interested in, so you know what you're getting into before it starts. That said, I said I'd come back to it, and let's talk about it now. That's pricing. So I mentioned $550 for the base. The grip is $170, so if you wanted that F16EX A10 kind of style grip. And then the Z-axis and extension is $80. So all told, you're looking at, what's that, roughly, $700. So no, actually closer to $800 if you wanted everything. Now shipping is where you're going to get a nice little surprise as well. Again, so all of what you were originally paying from Virpil back in the day, or even Winwing now in VKB, none of the shipping is cheap, right? Coming from overseas. So shipping prices, there's two options. One says domestic and one international. I plugged in my address, and I was able to select either one, but I imagine you should be selecting the international one. If you do that, you're looking at about $135 US shipping fee to the East Coast. So, all in budget on this is going to be rather high, but if you're someone who's been really interested in force feedback, this looks like a really promising addition. I'm really excited to see some initial reviews to see how it turns out. Okay, shifting things over to Virpil now. They had some hardware reveals of their own. Much of what we already talked about last week coming out of the Flight Sim Expo, but it was nice to kind of get some official posts from Virpil and offer a few additional details on what we might be seeing. So they presented their hardware in two different lineups, and as we kind of mentioned last week, they're kind of differentiating their product lineup now into an expert or kind of like a higher end series, and then they have the cadet line, which they're kind of viewing as their low to mid range. Honestly, my initial takeaways looking at both of these product lines is has more to do you want metal or do you not? That's where the standout to me seems. Not necessarily in all the additional inputs. I feel like you still get a pretty compelling product in the Cadet Series line. It's just experts providing you, if you want that solid premium metal grip feel, I'm using their term premium. I'm not someone who actually prefers that metal grip, but I'm using their words here. That's kind of what you're buying into at the higher price point of the Expert series. That said, the two products they talked about on the Expert line, the first up was the Flanker grip. They call this their most advanced fighter grip to date. It's, as I mentioned, built with a premium metal grip. I believe this outside of the Alpha Prime, right? This will be the first or second, I think, metal grip being developed by Virpil. So they also mentioned that this has a unique 3 trigger model. So you'll have 2 flip triggers and then the classic single stage main trigger, as well as an analog stick and then programmable LEDs, which is a nice touch. I think I mentioned last week my biggest complaint about this grip is that the thumb, where your thumb sits, is just a normal button press and not a 4-way hat with push. The Virpil rep on the Facebook page said to, quote, stay tuned if that was something that bothered you. So perhaps there's more information coming here about some potential modularity with this grip. That would be fantastic. Modularity is something I'd love to see more of these hardware manufacturers embrace. So hopefully that continues. Okay, the throttle now is called the VMAX Prime throttle. Again, we mentioned pictures last week. I have pictures again this week. but just telling you a little bit more about it in this episode. We have, they said that this new addition to the throttle lineup is based on over 3 years of hardware feedback. So they've taken a lot of thoughts into account of what people had to say about the current CM3 throttle, and then they claim that this is the best new throttle they have in their hardware lineup. Note, this will not replace the CM3. I thought it might, but they actually said on their Facebook page that they will continue to produce the CM3 as long as the community demands it. It will, however, be at a lower price point than this new VMAX throttle. So if you're interested in the new VMAX, it's going to be a little bit more pricey than the current CM3, so that kind of helps you ballpark what that might cost you. And again, as I mentioned, this will be an all-metal construction, so that is kind of a unique step for them. We haven't had a metal throttle grip from Virpil before, so very interesting on that front. And they do tout the expanded button pedal, and they did mention that the toggle caps on all the switches will actually be swappable, so that's kind of an interesting touch there. And they had mentioned improved backlighting and independently controlled zones. So if you're someone who really likes to customize your throttle, it sounds like this could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. So again, that's the expert line of products coming from Virpil. And there's also a cool trailer here if you're interested on their YouTube page of the flanker grip as well. Okay, but now let's shift over to the Cadet series. As I mentioned, the Cadet series, they mentioned, is more in line with a typical entry-level device, as they want to call it. I'd still classify it in the mid-tier, if I'm honest. I think that's kind of where I position this product lineup. What they talked about this week are the 3 main products we saw last week, so no huge surprises, but there's some interesting tidbits. So they touted the Aero Max flight stick and base. That's what we have pictured in the show notes right now. The cool thing about this is if you were interested in the Warbird product lineup, or you wanted something for your desk, but you always thought even the Warbird itself was too tall, they're trying to replicate a lot of the functionality of that Warbird grip, but at a much lower height. So this will be a more compact gimbal, but it will have a lot of that functionality we've seen before. So it will have a full metal cam and spring gimbal, and it does come with an optional throttle lever along the side that I saw last week and talked about. So that's a cool touch. And then they will come packaged with the Cadet Aero grip, was what they're calling this one. Very reminiscent of, it kind of has the shape of the current Alpha grip, but the reps did confirm this is a smaller grip than existing Alphas. And while we don't have a price point, depending on where this comes in at, I think this looks like a very, very compelling product. And I actually, personally, I think I like this grip better than what I saw on the flanker grip. Now, again, that's to be determined once we learn a little bit more about these things. They did confirm the grip will be for sale separately without the base and vice versa. So you can get these as one package, you can get them separately. So that's pretty cool to see. Okay, continuing on, we have the panel. They're calling this the Control Max panel. This is probably one of the more intriguing button boxes I've seen. So we talked a little bit about last week about some of the features it has. It has a gear handle. It has a hook handle that can also be replaced into a flap handle. It's got a few toggle switches, some encoders, and then a nice keypad. I just think this is a interesting addition. I think if I was to use this rather than a keypad, I could see in DCS using this as the F1 through 12 keys. But it's nice to have options. It's nice to see a button box with the keypad like that. So really very, very curious to see where this falls in line pricing wise and how it might compete with some of the VKB button boxes that are available for purchase as well. And then finally, they tout the Waypoint pedals. So this is their newest entry into the retro pedal market. They say that these offer high precision, high quality, and ergonomic control. But the biggest thing you probably want to know is like, how do they function? These will have vertical axis movement as found on their Ace Torque pedals, or if you're familiar with what the VKB pedals look like, where you kind of step on them and you go up and down. They do say there's a metal cam centering mechanism, but they do not mention if there will be any ability to, for example, remove the spring for helicopter use, and wherever you position the pedals, they stay there. And it is not equipped with any kind of, oh goodness gracious, I'm totally blanking on what I want to say. Any kind of the hardware that will kind of, the damper, there we go, finally came back to me. It is not equipped to one of those. It doesn't look like it would be capable of adding that. So this may be, if you're just looking for a simple entrance into the market, you want a basic pair of pedals that function really nicely, this could be a solid addition. Again, I think you need to wait for the price point on this one. And then finally, when is all this coming out? They did say the Cadet series are estimated to start arriving in Q4 of 2024. And they did say that the Expert series, so the Flanker Grip and Prime Throttle, that will be available for pre-order in July 2024. So we'll be learning a lot more about that very, very soon, specifically on the pricing front. And then finally from Virpil, we got an update on force feedback. So we mentioned everybody's getting into the force feedback game. Well, what about Virpil? So they posted an update. It's not necessarily explicit details, but they said force feedback has been something they've been discussing since 2016. And they knew this would be something they'd want to enter into their product range. They've been putting a lot of time and effort into thinking through what that would be and how they can make the best force feedback base possible. And they say, quote, "We are listening, we are working, we won't disappoint you." So stay tuned for announcements over the next few days. So we've gotten to several of those announcements already in the form of the Cadet and the Expert series. Maybe today, Sunday, is the day we hear about force feedback. Love to know a little bit more, but if you're a Virpil fan and hoping to pick up force feedback at some point, do stay tuned. They are working on it. We'll just have to wait and see what comes our way on that front. Okay, so that wraps up hardware news. Let's transition to the portion of the show where we highlight the work of people just like you, the community.
Really not tracking what they're doing exactly.
Community news is where we cover the latest goings on of the community, from campaigns and mods to servers, software, and everything in between. Starting things off, like we tend to do on several weeks, is we got an update from Stormbirds as well as one from Enigma. This is a series of Flight Sim Expo 2024 retrospectives that I want to kind of pull out. You know, now that people are back home, they've had some time to digest all the news that they've picked up while they were at the expo or talking to developers. This one, or these two, I should say, are focused on Combat Pilot. It's the upcoming Pacific Theater World War II sim. So Shamrock from Stormbirds had a really cool article that I've linked to in the show notes on his own opinion of what he saw when he was in the, at the Flight Sim Expo, and what he learned from the team over there. And he's got a really great video, which I'm playing right now, as I can mute that for you guys, of what you can expect from the sim in this demo state. So there's, not a lot to see, as the team was pretty explicit about. It's really early on in the development cycle. But he's got a really cool video. So if you weren't on the show floor and you wanted to know what you were missing, like the flyby the carriers and his attempted landings, you can see that. He also goes to say in his blog post, or I should say on Stormbirds.blog, that what he saw, quote, what he saw, experienced, and learned about Combat Pilot over 3 days at the expo was really, really impressive. So he said he chatted with Jason, Carlos, and the rest of the developers, and they made something clear. They have long-term plan with the sim. They know that the Battle of Midway is the start, that the Solomon Islands is their next destination, and that they want to be able to expand and capture other parts of the war in the Pacific and beyond that as well. So sounds like Shamrock said the team's really, really got their head on straight in terms of what they're looking to build and where they're looking to go with the sim. And I just thought that was really, really promising to hear. Again, I'm incredibly excited about another sim in the Pacific Pacific Theater, And with given their track record of development, I think it's in pretty strong hands. To confirm that, we also got an update on Combat Pilot from Enigma. So Enigma said, this is a video for you if you're interested. This was kind of his virtual show. So he didn't get to go to the Flight Sim Expo, but he did reach out to the development team over there. And he highlighted some news from about a 90-minute interview with the team. I have a link to that full video. The topics he covered were kind of some of the things we've mentioned previously, but like the origin story, where did they get the idea for this? What did they do in the last year of development? What are their plans for this coming year as well as beyond? And then talk a little bit about the demo. So I really thought it was a really well done video by Enigma. He distills that 90 minutes down to about a 10-minute video or so. And there was a very interesting discussion at one point about the development cadence as well as the level of fidelity that will be modeled in the game. And then there was a point about the team has indicated a willingness to work with third parties at some point, maybe for additional campaigns or aircraft. They weren't really explicit on that, but just thought that was some interesting elements that everyone would be interested in. So go check both of those out. Again, that's content from Shamrock over at Stormbirds.blog, and then a video from Enigma over on his YouTube page, which is at Enigma89. Okay, continuing on, we have a little bit something different this week. I want to highlight a post on the Hoggett subreddit from user someone_pissed, which is actually kind of a fitting username for what we're about to talk about. But he posted a question over there entitled, "What are usually stupid beginner mistakes?" So this is flight sim agnostic. We're not talking about just DCS or BMS or IL2. It was just kind of a fun post where he just asked other community members to share their own beginner, or in my case, even veteran mistakes. And it was, I don't know if it's just kind of that shared misery. Sometimes it's just fun to laugh at our mistakes that we share and that kind of appear common or that are shared amongst all of us. We've all been there, right? We've all done these things, but seeing it in writing and what some people were willing to share was really, really enjoyable. And I thought it would be worthy of sharing, so you all could go check it out. Some of my personal favorites were not arming your bombs before dropping them. Guilty as charged. Dogfighting with the gear out. Yep. Not, forgetting to put your landing gear up. Guilty as charged. And then dropping bombs while in a negative G maneuver, and then you're in for a rude awakening. My friend Bullet, who I fly with, I can say we are guilty as charged. And then deploying the number one that I enjoyed the most was one user admitted to deploying the Phantom's landing parachute on takeoff and then wondered why they couldn't take off. So again, this was just a fun thing. I thought everyone would enjoy it. And what are some of your own beginner mistakes? Let me know. Leave a comment in the show on YouTube or on Spotify, or send me an email. I think it's fun when we can all just enjoy the mistakes we make, right? That's the best part of flying virtually. You don't have to pay any price. You just laugh about it and move on to the next thing. So thank you, Someone Pissed, for getting that thread started over there. It was an enjoyable discussion. All right. Now we have lots of DCS news in the community section to get through. So let's kick things off probably with one of the bigger pieces of news is the T-38 Talon. So if you're interested in this trainer aircraft for the U.S. Air Force, or that's also used a lot of NATO allies, it is a free community mod coming to DCS being developed by VECO Simulations, VECO. So I've got a bunch of links for you to learn more. It's to their website, to their Discord, and also to their official post on the Eagle Dynamics forums. But essentially, the team is making a full fidelity version of the T-38 Talon, which is the two-seat supersonic jet trainer that entered into service in 1961. It was the world's first jet trainer to exceed Mach 1, and it's been used extensively to train more than 72,000 pilots since its inception. So, pretty storied history for this aircraft. If you're someone that enjoys that piece of history, or just trainer aircraft in general in DCS, or free aircraft in DCS, right? That's pretty cool. It'll be available from that team. It's going to feature a clickable multi-crew cockpit. It's got highly detailed 3D models and textures, and it will have its own custom-built external flight model and standalone avionics. So it'll be a full replica of that classic steam gauge cockpit, and it is suitable for instrument flight training, so if you're interested in that. And I thought this little element was kind of interesting. They've carefully chosen a 1970s avionics configuration for the aircraft that allow them to fully implement every functionality they want without the need to own any other module. So this is not a case where you need to own Flaming Cliffs 3 or any other module to tap into some of the underlying code. This will be completely free of that. Just install the mod and you'll have a full fidelity aircraft. So, when we think back to the history of some of the mods that have come out for DCS so far that are really compelling pickups, like the H60, the C-130, the A4, the OV-10 Bronco. I'm sure I'm missing one other. I apologize. This will be another. Oh, the T-45. The T-38 will be a strong addition to the game. It's a great announcement trailer for it. You can find it over on their YouTube page at VECO Simulations, VECO Simulations. Now, me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the trainer aircraft. If I'm going to fly virtually in DCS, I just want to get into the aircraft I want to fly and go learn that. But I know a lot of people are interested in this stuff, and it's really, really cool to see a new team committing to making an aircraft of such high quality. So very, very cool announcement. On the community side of the house, we have Reflected, who I often feature in the developer news, but this is just kind of a more what I thought was more of community outreach in some ways, so I wanted to feature it in this section. He's got a fun video about his upcoming F4 campaign for mid-killers, where he details the training syllabus you could expect to fly in the upcoming campaign. So again, this is his Top Gun 1969 campaign. So he walks through a nice in-depth discussion of what some of his research termed up in terms of what kind of things you might be flying. So you'll have like 1v1 engagements, 2v1, 2v2s, 2 versus unknown, 4 versus unknown, and then some air-to-ground stuff. And he also goes on to explain why he opted for a Navy campaign instead of using an Air Force F4 model for the Air Force. My answer would be you should always just do a Navy campaign, right? I mean, come on. What are we even talking about here? But no, there's actually there's a reason behind that if you're interested. And then you could go check out a really cool video. That whole video he's done over on his YouTube page, which is at Reflected Simulations. He always is putting out great content, and this is no exception. Okay. The DCS Hornet School needs your help. That's right. If you haven't heard of it, this was new to me as well. This is the Hornet School. It says, do you like to teach? We've developed a tried and true program to help anyone quickly learn the necessary skills to become successful in flying the F-18, and they are looking for mentors to help teach. We know how difficult it is to learn high fidelity flight simulators. Watching videos and reading guides is an arduous feat, and we've come up with a better way to teach new virtual pilots. So they have a whole little training program over there that will get people up and running with the F-18 and give them all the necessary training to join a multiplayer squadron. So they'll start you with no preconceived notions, right? How to set up your hardware and bind controls in DCS, how to set up SRS, get you working with head training, or head tracking, excuse me, and then they'll get you covered through the full startup sequence, how to use the radios, how to navigate, how to fly, how to employ weapons, how to air refuel, VFR, IFR, everything you need. They said their Discord's got over 1,000 members now with 50 active students, and they're always looking for new mentors and new people who want to train. So if you like to teach, they need you. If you're a guy who wants to get back to the DCS community, they need you. If you just want to help join a team and spread the DCS love, they need you. That's over on Discord. The link is in the show notes. It's discord.gg/The Hornet School. And an additional shout out, the Hornet School is teamed up with the group I regularly fly with, which is We Run Liberation. And they're going to have some of their pilots flying in the WRL campaigns. So that's also a great group to check out. If you haven't heard of We Run Liberation, I got links in the show notes. A great crew to fly with. Very low pressure environment where we just have fun and enjoy the game. Okay, so that's the Hornet School. I featured it here just because I love to see groups giving back to the community, and that's exactly what this is all about. Making folks, or helping folks enjoy the game, getting away, helping remove roadblocks and getting people in the cockpit and having fun, because that's really what we're all here to do. Okay, talking about fun things we can do in DCS, we have an update to DCS Liberation. So DCS Liberation 11.1.1 was released this week. So if you're interested into that mission designer or mission creator, go check out DCS Liberation or the spin-off DCS Retribution. The main thing I want to highlight here is that they've added support for Heapler's F4E and the OH-58 from Polychop. So if you're looking to fly those aircraft in DCS Liberation, you can now do that. This update is compatible with version 11.0 and 11.1 if you've already had those installed. There's a bunch of other fixes as well. You can read about those in the show notes if you're interested, but the biggest one was just the addition of F4 and the OH-58. So very, very cool to see. I'd imagine we'll probably see an update soon as well once the CH-47 releases, and maybe some campaigns for Afghanistan once this week's update is complete for DCS. All right, the final piece of DCS news we have is one focused on the multiplayer scene, and that's the Gray Flag server. So if you're not aware of the Gray Flag server, it is partly developed by Grey Wolf, the voice of Jester. So if you've flown the F-14 by Heapler, you've heard of Grey Wolf, or you've heard Grey Wolf, I should say. He announced that the Grey Wolf, the Gray Flag multiplayer server is developing their popular campaign and server, and they're porting it over to the Caucasus map. It's currently in existence over on the Syria map, but if you're someone who hasn't picked up that map or you just prefer flying on Caucasus, they're currently testing it starting this weekend. They announced this over on Hoggit, so I got a link to that over there. And I have some links and description in the show notes about what exactly is Gray Flag. So the Caucasus version is going to be focused initially on the modern version, and then they're going to follow up with a Cold War version in the 1980s. But from a larger point of view, Gray Flag is a hardcore, persistent multiplayer co-op campaign. So you essentially can team up with other Blue Forces members, and you can fight against the AI and a select few number of Red Force human pilots. So there is a little bit of PvP, but those spots are pretty limited. The compelling part about that, though, is the persistence, right? So they save the position of the battlefield every time the server resets. And then when you log back in, you pick up right where the game left off. So it's kind of this persistent campaign. You can fight against the enemy, move the battle lines. And then one other fun, interesting addition is how player-driven the campaign is, not only from a combat standpoint, but also logistically. So there is a lot of logistics involved in this map. So it makes use of the C-130 mod and the H-60 mod. So you need to have both of those installed to play on the map. But if you are someone who haven't even spent $1 on DCS, you can jump in, download those two aircraft for free, right? Those community mods, and boom, get started on the server and have a lot of fun. Even more so once this comes to Caucasus, right? Because you'll have that new map available to play on that comes for free with DCS, and you don't have to worry about picking up the Syrian map. So I've got a lot of detailed notes in the show notes regarding what is gray flag, what are some requirements. I also linked to a really, really good video interview the team did with Tricker. So if you haven't followed him, it's at Tricker DCS on YouTube, Tricker. He did a wonderful interview with Grey Wolf and then one of his other fellow developers on the server. So you can learn a little bit more about the server, where they designed it from, and what they're planning to do with it. So very, very cool. You can also include a bunch of show notes about how to find the Gray Flag Discord, the Gray Flag Syria server post, and then they have a nice Google document about how to play on the server. So if you're looking to get involved in the DCS multiplayer scene, perhaps you just finished the F-18 training syllabus with the Hornet School, now you're looking ready to fly, go ahead and check out Grey Wolf as well. All right, that wraps things up on the community side of the house. Let's shift things over to the user content of the week now.
They just blew themselves up. They just blew themselves up.
Sometimes it's a mission, sometimes it's a tutorial, sometimes it's just an interesting topic of conversation here in the content of the week. And this week, we have maybe a little bit more of a PSA in light of what we talked about previously, and that is a Strike Eagle radar community fix. That's right. We mentioned one way to get around the broken radar for the F-15E is to kind of play around with your system date after you've launched the game. It's not ideal. Well, thanks to Striker TV on the Hoggett subreddit, he made me aware of this. There is a fix developed by an individual called Slasher84 who posted this on his GitHub page or on their GitHub page, and they called it Budgie. What is Budgie? It's short for, oh gosh, you guys are going to kill me if you're from Australia, but it's Budgie, Budgeriga, a small Australian parrot. Without radar, it's basically what the Strike Eagle was reduced to. I thought that joke was pretty funny, so I had to include it, and I apologize for butchering the name. But anyway, long story short, Budgie, as we'll call it, is just a little mod, lightweight mod for DCS, similar to SRS or TACView or even the A4E community mod we already talked about. It will always run with DCS, but it's only going to fix the F-15E. This will work on Steam and on standalone, and essentially it uses something called Microsoft Detours to redirect the date time function call to the Strike Eagle. It's going to route it through this little mod, and essentially it's going to give back the date you need to get the aircraft working again. So it's going to reset the date that's going to pass back to the game to before it broke, and boom, your radar will work. The big question is, does this pass integrity check? The team over there says they have confirmed it does appear to work on all popular multiplayer servers with this mod active. There's no IC issues, so hopefully this will continue. Even if this, hopefully the long-term solution, right, is we get this patched out by Eagle Dynamics itself, and that removes the need for this mod. But until that happens, I thought a lot of you who own the Strike Eagle, if you still have it, would be interested in this fix. So again, it's called Budgie. The link to the GitHub page is in the show notes. I'll make sure it's there for you. And then the developer even goes on to say that they hope this is a temporary solution that will help users who might otherwise request a refund to hold on a bit longer and, most importantly, get some value out of the product they paid for. So thank you very much, Slasher84, and thank you, Striker TV, for making me aware of this. Again, that's the DCS F-15E Strike Eagle radar fix called Budgie. Okay, let's shift things over to the Simpit Spotlight now.
You don't see any big stream and flames or smoke coming out there.
It's time for my favorite segment of the show, where we highlight a community member's personal Simpit setup, no matter how simple or complex, to celebrate the joy of flying from home. And this week, we have the My Everything rig from the Real Viking 84 over on the Home Cockpits subreddit, which is a great username, by the way, the Real Vikings 84. So this is a Simpit setup, which uses this individual uses for sim racing, flight sims, space sims, and then first-person shooters. So you really get to understand why it is called the My Everything cockpit. So showcasing the pictures right now on the video version of the show, and you can see they're not kidding. They have it all. They have three 48-inch 4K TVs. They have a single 34-inch Samsung monitor. They built the rig out of a aluminum profile, so nice sturdy rig, three monitor wraparound TVs, and then a monitor mounted above the center TV, so you can kind of keep an eye on your web browser, Discord, or streaming. They have a car seat from a BMW. They've got their own Invicta wheel for their sim racing needs. They have, or I should say, Cube Controls GT Pro wheel for their sim-based needs. They got Virpil Alpha sticks left and right for their CM3. They've got control panels. They got the CM3 throttle from Virpil, 2 stream decks. I mean, you want it, they probably have it in their sim pit. So clearly a lot of time and effort gone into this pit. And I really liked a follow-up comment from HammerTime2769, who summed up Simpit Construction so well when they said, you know, it's funny when someone posts a video of a simple setup, nothing bad about it, complexity isn't needed, it just makes it more fun. And then they say, I'm finally done with the cockpit. And then you see a setup like this and no mention of it being finally done, because there's a point in everyone's addiction where you realize it's never completely finished. It never will be. So true. That's the glory of this hobby, they go on to say, and I totally agree. It's not about being happy or not. It's about the joy of the hobby and upgrading, evolving your setup as you go. That's half the fun. Hammer Time goes on to say, I love getting a new part or a piece of equipment to add. A lot of people, including myself, likely don't have the funds to buy everything they want right away, so they slowly upgrade their setup over time, and I completely agree with that. I think that's the common approach. I think that's the fun approach. And that's why I love to share this stuff with you guys, and we share this hobby as a whole. It's always about what fun, new, creative ways can we do to improve our game experience, and that's really what the Simpit Spotlight's all about. So thank you so much, The Real Viking 84, for sharing your setup, and thanks, Hammer Time, for your wonderful comments that I certainly agree with. And that's what we're here to do, is celebrate this hobby of ours. All right, let's wrap things up by transitioning over to the listener feedback portion of the show.
612, departure radio check.
So if there's any news, community content, or Simpit setup that you would like to see covered, you can always get in touch with the show via email. That's feedback@thehangarbaypod.com, or you can find me on social media at thehangarbaypod on Twitter or on Instagram. Your comments help me shine a light on the great things going on in the community. I always appreciate your thoughts and suggestions about where the show has gone next. And if you've liked what you've heard, please leave a like, rate the show on your podcast yet, or better yet, subscribe to the show and catch it next week. I love interacting with all of your comments there. You guys have been really, really great about leaving more comments as the weeks have gone along, and it's been really, really fun for me to engage with you, learn what topics you like, and that helps me kind of cater to what we should focus on in upcoming weeks as well. So always great to hear from you. Please reach out and let me know how you think the show is doing. That said, that kind of wraps things up for this week. We're going to have a huge show next week. That's what I'm anticipating. It'll be 4th of July weekend here in the States, so we'll have fun in that regard. But there should also be quite a bit of sim news coming, especially on the DCS front. So anyway, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. As I mentioned, we'll be back next week, as we always do, to get you squared away with the latest military flight simulation and hardware news. But until then, think about what you put out into the community and make it a better place. Fly safe, everyone.
Right here. Let's go down low on the deck. Unload 500 knots. Let's get out of here.
The missile knows where it is at all times. Oh, I'm sorry. What I meant to say is that you can find the video show on YouTube or on Spotify at the Hangar Bay Pod. The audio show is available on all major podcast providers. You can contact the show via email, feedback@thehangarbaypod.com, or on Instagram and Twitter at thehangarbaypod. Show notes and links to everything discussed on this week's show are available at thehangarbaypod.com.
It takes a lot more than just fancy flying.